My mic is muted and has been muted for about 36 minutes now. So, you know, it's all good. Thanks for pointing that out. Oh, good. I will sum up everything I said in the last 36 minutes as we have an awesome 2D demo right now, and it is great to play. The code is a little wonky. We are making a 3D world to make it even greater to play, and making the code a little less wonky. So everyone's caught up now. And yeah, we are hunting down where the inventory system is set up in our old project, and we're going to start porting it over to the new project. We set up an inventory window over here that we will show and hide when we click this new inventory button. And then we'll get it all hooked up so you can go collect items in the world. They're added to your inventory. You can craft stuff. I think that's when the fun's going to begin. But let's go ahead and let's add an inventory window manager to this guy. And we can just hook up that button, of course, as a nice little warm up, I guess. So we want a public void open inventory window. That's actually perfect. So, well, actually, let's have a toggle. So now on our new inventory button, all we have to do is click it to toggle, and it should open and close correctly. If I set that up correctly. Public void inventory window manager. Oh, just a little blind. And actually, I don't know if that will work if this object is disabled. Let's give that a quick shot. We might need some sort of like parent window manager object. But if we were to click this button, okay, it does work. We want to prevent moving around, but you know, it works. And then we have a lot of input work to do on differentiating between interacting with the UI and interacting with the world anyway. I think what we'll end up doing is just blocking raycasts from the UI. So if you were to click something here, it doesn't trigger a click in the actual world. But we will get to that when we get to that. Let's go ahead and let's first commit everything we got, and then we'll get crazy with the code. So hook up inventory window toggle, and then let's start bringing over some code. So let's go ahead and switch this to a one column layout. How do we want to do this? Let's just use our massive screen. Hopefully things don't get too small for you. But we can just copy stuff over from here into here. And we will just grab everything that we think we might need, and then we'll hook it all up. So I guess we can just start. We definitely need our Chromagolem library, because that's how we interact with the AI. I can't actually copy and paste it over. So we will do this in Finder. And shout out to our Chroma Golem API, or library here. We actually have an API for people to use, and you can check it out at api.chromagolem.com. But if you like how we are generating all these NPCs and conversations and items and everything, that's all you need, is just use that API. Let's go ahead and grab that. Maybe I think we can skip over all the downloaded stuff, as well as the images and the prefabs. We definitely want to copy over our prompts that we have set up for generating people and items and everything. So our scenes, we can also skip over, I think. It might be nice to have them, but we can always come back for them. I think we will just grab the whole scripts directory. We're not going to need all the scripts, but we'll pick and choose what we want. And the WebGL templates, we'll skip that for now. That's more for building. But let's also grab our quest database as well. So that should be everything we need from the old project. We can kind of hook stuff up. One thing that we did not do in the old project is set up scriptable objects for items or inventories or recipes or things like that. I haven't decided if we will do that, because there are some problems like serializing those things when you create them at runtime. But serialization, like saving the game and loading the game, is something we haven't really implemented at all. So maybe we can just tackle all that when we do, and then use the scriptable objects. So we have some nice errors over here. Let's see what we got. I'm sure we forgot to copy something over. Right, we need to grab the Newtonsoft JSON parser. So I always forget the get URL for it. Let's grab it though. In the package manager, there's a had from get URL, and I always forget where it is, but it's going to be com dot please medium com.unity.NuGet.NewtonSoft.json. There it is. So we'll install that real fast so we can work with JSON instead of having to use Unity's built-in JSON parser, which doesn't work with complex objects like we're using. Cool, everything should be good to go now. If we were to start up the game, we would have all that functionality, but obviously nothing would do anything because we don't have objects set up to use all that functionality. But I didn't think that we brought over the prefabs folder, but that's fine. We can have that. And I guess they all kind of work. A little bit. So let's just kind of start from the start. We have a 3D world. We have an inventory window that we can now open. So let's go ahead and let's default that to open just so we can work with it pretty quickly. I think what we want to do is set up some databases. So let's just make a nice little container for that. And then we will set up our I guess a person database is probably the best place to store each person's inventory, including the player. So we'll set up a person database. We will set up an item database. And we will set up a recipes database. Obviously those are just empty objects right now, but we will fill them out. And the location database we're probably gonna do away with entirely because I mean it's obviously you want to be able to travel to other locations and explore a bigger world, but I think for the sake of not being too ambitious with this demo, we will just stick to this one location. So it doesn't really make sense to just store a bunch of stuff about it in the location database and then have no other locations. But we do eventually want to put in like train station or something so you can travel to other locations. But we will skip over that for now. Let's see here. I think what we want to do now is let's set up our... Let's create a new folder for our inventory system. Let's create a folder for scriptable objects, which we will use items, recipes, and inventories, I think. So let's create, well, let's look at our scripts. I think we already have an item script that we can convert over. Models. So, yeah. We're just using our equatable interface, which is fine. We can also make this a scriptable object, I think. But we don't really need to. The main benefit of the scriptable objects is letting us modify and set up a lot of these content-based things from the inspector instead of what we're doing now with just setting it all up in code. I don't think there are other big benefits for using the scriptable objects, so maybe we leave items and recipes as just plain C# objects for now, but we do want to have a inventory scriptable object that we can assign to NPCs in the world. We can assign it to the player, and that way we get a proper reference for all those. So let's go ahead and let's do that. And fun fact, haven't ever made an inventory system from scratch. I've typically followed tutorials and mixed and matched other libraries I've written, but it'll be a fun one to do from scratch. So, what our inventory system needs is obviously a list of items for all the items you have. All those items are going to have a stack amount. And we also need a list of slots to display them in. So, for example, if we look at this UI window here and we say, we need to populate this UI window from this inventory. We need to know what item is in what slot, and we need to know what quantity of items are in that slot. So, let me just think about this with some coffee. because I think there's two approaches we could take. We could have it all controlled with an inventory within the inventory object, and we basically have all that data, and then the inventory window takes in an inventory object to populate itself. So we wouldn't necessarily need to know some things, but it gets a little bit wonky with like where do you store that your stack of 5 biscuits is in inventory slot 6? Is that stored on the item itself? Probably not. But it should be stored in the inventory object, I think. And it shouldn't be stored in the inventory window controller. So I think what we want is a list of item slots, and each of those slots either has item data or doesn't. So let's make a inventory slot helper class that we can say public item in this slot, and a public int stack size. And then we can just let's do a nice constructor. We can add the add item. I guess we can generate a lot of this. If we add an item to the slot, there's the thing I hate most about inventory systems is just all of the edge cases of what happens when you add an item to this slot. If there's nothing in the slot, you can just add the item. However, this assumes that whatever item is in the slot is the same item, which is not always correct. You also have like stack limits. So what happens when your limit is 10 items and you have a stack of 8 and you drop in another stack of 5, like you can't just add to the stack size. I think inventory systems on their own aren't actually that complicated. They just get a lot more complicated when you start incorporating stacked items. And then also looking at a lot of these edge cases of working with stacked items. But let's just kind of mock out some of the cases that we can go down. And actually, as I'm thinking through this more, the responsibility of this inventory slot probably shouldn't be to handle at least some of these edge cases. Like if you have berries in a slot and you drop in a boat, the swapping of those two items should probably be handled up in the inventory and should never actually be handled down at the slot level. So maybe we do actually just assume at this point that if you are adding an item to the slot, that the slot is either empty or the slot has the item you're adding already. And then similarly, we can remove item from slot. We probably also, let's do a clear slot, just some helper functions that we can use. Is empty is the one that I wanted. So our inventory now, Okay. Our inventory now can have a public list of item slots or inventory slots. And when we think we want a start function that lets us also say how many slots we want in this inventory, because your inventory might have different slots than the store or a chest in your house or an NPC's inventory and so on. So let's just say slots is equal to, and let's just default it to whatever the player's inventory is. We got 3, 6, 8 by 9, so 72 slots. So when we create this inventory and it gets instantiated in the game, then we go ahead and create 72 empty slots with no items in them. So that seems fine. We'll probably have another class on the inventory window itself that takes in the inventory as a parameter, draws that many slots, and then in each one it'll draw whether there's an item in it or not. Excuse me. So that is enough to get started. If we go ahead and close all but this, if we go over to our RS player, what we can do is we could add the inventory directly to the player controller script, but I think what we want to do is maybe make things a little bit more componentized, less dependent on each other. Maybe we can make a generic like has inventory script that we can add to the player, we can add to NPCs, we can add to storage containers and so on. Let's go ahead and let's do that. So really all this needs is a public inventory. And since we set up the inventory as a scriptable object, what we can do is let's create another folder for data. And we do need to have a create asset menu call so we can create inventories. So let's create inventory system inventory. We say player inventory. It has 72 slots. If we go over to our player, we can now drag in the player inventory, and now this player object has a reference to this specific inventory. So when we create other NPCs in the world and storage containers, chests, etc., we can also just add that has inventory script, create an inventory, drag it in, and we can set up the inventory itself. And for example, like treasure chests or something, we probably want some functionality here to let us specify what items are in the inventory when we are at this like playtime. But for now, we can just default to empty, and then we're adding some code to the player's inventory at the start. So I think the logical next step is to start on our inventory window manager, which we will give a public void draw or let's just say load inventory. And let's store that. And what we're going to do is whenever we toggle this open, we will call load inventory with the player's inventory. Which, let's just go ahead and add a straight reference to that. we can do now is in this inventory window, which always is the player's inventory, we can just grab a reference to the player's inventory. Let's go ahead and let's make that private. Okay, so here we just want to say if we're opening the inventory window, we go ahead and load it with the data that we want. We will then make it active after it's loaded in. But here is where we will say clear out the inventory slots, and then for the size of the inventory, create instances of these inventory slot prefabs. So let's go ahead and create, well, let's go kind of finalize the look of this first, and then we'll create a prefab and we'll get it drawing. So let's take a look at it. I've been customizing all the colors on these. All this green is my abomination. So I think we're gonna make these guys green as well. But maybe like a little bit less green. That'll do. All right. So let's go ahead and let's separate out all these old system prefabs, because we're not using any of them and I could delete them. I just want to keep them around for now. But I do want to have a prefabs folder. Well, actually no, I don't. I want to put that in the system folder. So let's say prefabs down here in the inventory system. We have an inventory slot which does not have a script on it, which is fine for now. But what we will end up doing is set it as a prefab on the inventory window manager. We say clear the current inventory slots. It's not right. We need a reference to the inventory slot container. So we're going to iterate over all of each child object in there. We destroy them to clear out all the slots, and then we create the new slots of the inventory size. We don't have this script yet, or even know if we need it yet, but we can just create a new inventory slot with that container as the parent, and that container has a grid layout group, so they should all get laid out properly with this spacing and padding. So what we want to do, let's go ahead and just delete a ton of them to make sure it's drawing correctly, and they should all be green when we draw them. And let's go ahead and just for quick testing, let's call toggle window open when we start the game. Everything should have all the references it needs. We can go ahead and you know what, let's actually just let's leave it open. Let's call load inventory. So when we press play, assuming none of these scripts that we brought over are going to cause any problems, which I guess they are, and also we didn't set that reference. Let's see here. Inventory window, we need our inventory slot prefab and our inventory slots layout group reference. Let's try that again. It should clear this out and draw 72 green ones. All right. it does. Cool. And we can oh, right. We didn't set up the close button yet. But every time we close it and reopen it, it'll redraw it, which is what we want to do instead of updating the display every time you if it's closed and you're picking up items and stuff. We don't want those not necessarily calls. We will have to make sure that if it's open and you pick up an item, it redraws it. But we can do that. I think that's a good trade-off to have. Let's go ahead and set up the toggle button on the close thing, and then let's also, what we can do is look at this player inventory. If we were to set it to 20 and close this, open it, okay, it does take changes into account. Just wanted to make sure. And fun thing about scriptable objects, if you edit them in playtime, they're like the only thing that keeps those changes when you exit playtime. So you need to make sure to undo those changes if you're debugging stuff. Let's go ahead and this guy, our exit button, let's add a button component to him as well. And we know that this panel is going to be open when this button is shown, so we can just reuse our toggle button to toggle it closed instead of having a separate close function. Let's go ahead and just do that. Inventory window, toggle window open, that should now close it. This draws correctly, so we need to probably add an item to the player's inventory. Like, there's a lot of stuff to do from now. We need to add some items to the player's inventory. We need to be in this loop here when we're instantiating that slot. We need to be checking the inventory object to see if there is an item at that slot index. And if there is, we need to load that item into that slot. We need to set up dragging and dropping between items, or between slots really. And then we also need all those handlers for dragging it into other containers. So for example, we want to be able to drag items up here. That was a little bit weird in the experience on our 2D version, where if you were to drag items into the workbench, they actually leave your inventory. So if you like open up the shop and it shows your inventory, you can't see things in your workbench. You need to drag it back to your inventory and then open up the shop. So I think what we'll want to do, we could have the items stay in your inventory and also appear in the workbench. And then if you combine items, it changes in the inventory. I think that's a little bit weird. I think what we want to do is drag the item from your inventory into the workbench. And then if you were to close this panel, any items in the workbench just get added to your inventory. And we could store like what inventory slot they came from and try and put them back in. I feel like that just introduces a lot more edge cases of like, if I drag cherries from this slot in, and then I drag a book from here into that slot, I don't want to deal with all those edge cases up front of like, all right, that slot is full, let's go find the next empty slot. Or if you only drag half of your stack in, do you add to that stack? If you drag half of your stack in and then you drag more into that stack from one of these items and you try and add it back in, but it overflows into another slot. A lot of fun stuff with inventories. But we've got our toggle button. Next up, I think, is just adding some items to your inventory. So I think what we want to do is let's start our item database. We actually don't have a script for that because everything is in the recipe database right now. So let's create one. And we will stick that in our inventory system as well. We'll create a new scripts folder there. I'm trying out a new layout for organizing stuff a little bit better at scale, I think. Because previously you just have a ballooned out scripts directory, you have a giant prefabs directory, and then you have some like weird small directories that apply to different systems. So instead of having those 3 or 4 directories just get bigger and bigger and bigger as you add more systems, trying to duplicate or pull out the pieces, pull out the prefabs, pull out the scripts and so on, and just put that in a standalone system directory. And I like it so far, but we'll see how it performs. And it even works. I mean, we are putting in our downloaded stuff in there too, so it's nice. Right. What were we doing? The inventory or the item database. Actually, let's go ahead and rather than scripts, let's do databases. And we'll pull in some of these too of like components, I guess, but I'm going to wait for a few more UI scripts to kind of pile up to see how we want to group them really. So we've got our item database. We set it up as a singleton of item database so we can access it from anywhere. And we really just want to have, I think, a list of items. Let's go look at the recipe database and see how it's set up. We have there a dictionary of item name to item for the fast lookup, which, yeah, that's probably a better thing to do, I guess. We also do have a list of items for what the player should start with. I think we'll want to set that up in the actual player inventory instead, so we can skip over that. We have discovered items, which is all the items the player has seen, which are used in like player rewards. So we set up hundreds of items to start with, but like one of them is a perpetual motion machine, just to be able to set up an achievement of if you craft that, you get this achievement. But we don't want that to be just randomly given to the player before they've discovered it on their own. So we're tracking which items the player has seen in order to not let them skip through gates, progression gates like that. And then the rest of it's more for recipes. So I think let's just go ahead and this is really all, maybe the item database itself and the discovered items. I think that can live in the item database. So let's go ahead and say a public dictionary, or let's make it private. And then we'll also have a list of all items the player has discovered. So I think we'll want that. And I guess that could be a hash set. It doesn't really need to be ordered. I think we have it as a list because we want to enumerate. Oh, it is a hash set over there. Okay, yeah. So I don't have to worry about switching the structure over. Alright, so we can go ahead and just do some quick helper functions here. I think that should be good. So we can now add an item to the database by the item structure, which is what we do when we ask the AI to generate an item. We get it back in JSON form and serialize it into an item structure. I think we were adding items by name as like placeholders and then kicking off generations for them in the back end. I think we actually might want to not do that and force all ads to have all of the information already done. Because this is a recipe for like race conditions where technically an item exists, but now you either need to manage, okay, has it been fully generated? Or can the player like receive it in some way before it has all its data? And then you need to go find all the instances of it and go update that description or update that flavor text or whatever. So we're going to get rid of add item by name. But find item, find or create item. That's kind of the flow that we had before of like, okay, the player has crafted a torch. What we would end up doing is originally we just got back the name of the item from the AI, and we go and see, okay, does an item with this name exist? If it does, return that item. If it doesn't, go generate a new item. I think what we want to actually do is do find or create item with the item data now that we're getting the full item data from the AI. And then what can happen is if, for example, there's an existing item of a flame sword that has +5 fire damage. Oh, hey Tony, thanks for joining in. We talked muted for the first 40 minutes, so you didn't miss much. But if we do find or create item with the item data, which is what we're going to get back from the AI, it does away with any ambiguity in new attributes that might be added to that item. So if we had this item already existing in the game, the player has discovered it, they've found it, they've done whatever, it would be weird if they combined fire and a sword later and they got an item that had +10 fire damage, and they're like, why is it different? So what we can do is when they combine fire and a sword, we get back a serialized item with the name and description. If that name is the same name as an item we already have, we ignore the new properties generated and we just return that item that already exists in the database. Otherwise, we create a new item. If this were like blazing sword and we got this back, we'd see, oh, we don't have a blazing sword. We add that, and this is the item the player gets instead. So that'll work well, I think. And we can look up items by name. We can remove items by name. Remove items by data by matching the name. Yeah, okay. So that should be good. Let's see. I think what we want to do, let's go ahead and let's add a temporary start to this. And let's not put it here, but on the player controller, we want to temporarily add a couple items to their inventory just so we can draw them into the inventory and use them. Quick TLDR on the vision for how the 3D world experience should be in the crafting game. Yes. Let me write this comment and let me pull up the previous version of the game is the 2D version, where you basically have some static NPCs in a randomized location. Each one has their own problems and quests that they generate. The whole gameplay loop is you go and you combine items. So cactus and chalk. I don't know what you get. Maybe a chalky cactus or something. A desert marker. That makes sense. So the whole loop is you trying to craft items to help them. And the way things are set up right now is you get some items back as a tip when you are helping them. It's just a way to help out your inventory. Obviously, that's a little weird. They should be able to just giving you like mostly money or the occasional item from their inventory or something. And we also have a placeholder right now for foraging, so you can go get items that would be free in the world. But it comes down to the economy of this is basically you end up using all of your items by combining items, trying to get the right items for them. We're basically taking this foraging menu, which it refreshes every time you go to a new location. So here's a bigger one. We want to be able to give the player the option to go out and get as much of any item they want. So if they go talk to a person and that person is like, man, I really need something that keeps the jail bars from melting. And the player comes up with the idea of like, ooh, I want some ice gel or something like that. Ice gel wax. They, in this current system, don't really have a lot of options because they are limited to what's in their inventory at that time, what's in the shop, what they can forage for. But if they have that idea for a solution for this person, I think it is cool to be able to let them go out and collect ice, collect wax, collect mud, whatever they need to craft stuff. So they're building out this. Let me craft this to unlock the recipe book. They're building out a recipe book of all this stuff that they can make. So if somebody needs something and maybe it's prismatic garments that they want, they're like, okay, I need to get prismatic leather and needle and thread. I can go buy needle and thread from the store. How do I make prismatic leather? I need to go get leather from the world. I need to make prismatic clay. How do I make prismatic clay? I need to go collect mud and rainbows. However you want to do that. Basically, the 3D world, in short, is a way to let players go out and collect more of the items that they need to craft whatever they think the solution would be, rather than treating it more like a puzzle game of here's the problem, here's the items in your inventory, what can you craft from that? So instead, we have turn on world. We're going to have a big ol'... I think you'll mostly be constantly in this 3D world. So you can go out and collect stone or wood or berries or water or rainbows or whatever you need. So I think we're moving more towards kind of just opening it up, where if you want to just kind of mindlessly go collect a bunch of stuff, or I would love to add some like RuneScape-y levels of like, I'm going to go train wood cutting. I'm going to cut down a bunch of trees and get a bunch of wood and just be collecting stuff for whenever you want to go into a big session of like helping people in town. You have all these resources already. So I think you can get kind of that bounce back and forth of, yeah, you are in this 3D world, but you're not always out like collecting items, or like you're not always just getting a quest, going and getting specific items, coming back. You might just want to go out and adventure and collect a bunch of stuff, and then maybe spend some time in town helping different people, or really just doing whatever. Or if you wanted to do a more like merchant-y thing and you unlock a recipe of like stone and water makes gold nuggets or something, you can go collect a bunch of stone, collect a bunch of water, sell those gold nuggets to the shop, and then you can have a lot more money to go kind of not necessarily need to go collect items as much, but if you get a problem, you can head to the shops and buy items directly that way. So it's kind of just different ways to accomplish the same core loop of get a quest, craft an item, give it back. But now you have a lot more opportunities to collect more items, collect a lot more varied items, or like use the items you collect to get currency to collect items through shops. And I know Andrew and I both have some big ideas for more like events and stuff that can happen in the world that we need to flesh out more, but we're gonna add a lot more opportunities for you to use more items. So I want to also have a lot more opportunities to be gathering them whenever you can. That's the gist of it. Do you think that sounds like a good idea to constantly be in this 3D world, or do you think it would be better or more fun to kind of be dumped into this world for gathering and then go back to that 2D menu style for the crafting side or like the questing side? Interesting to see how it will play out. I feel like there is a danger that the gathering will feel like a chore you need to do for your puzzle part. Yeah, I agree with that. I think I want it to feel fun, and I personally love the games where I can just kind of mindlessly go collect stuff for some time and then progress through plot or progress through story. So I think there's a lot of stuff that I can do at the beginning of, like, obviously you're not going to have a weight limit and stuff like that intentionally makes it feel more like a chore. But I think there's a lot of fiddling that you can do for like item quantities. If you, an extreme example is you go out into town, you chop down this tree, you get 1,000 wood. You click on this flower, you get 1,000 flowers. You click on this rock, you get 1,000 stone. Like, then you should be set for crafting or whatever you need. The other end of the extreme is like you click on this tree, you wait 30 seconds and you get 1 wood. That's gonna definitely feel more like a chore. Opposite end of the spectrum feels like, I mean, it's not really rewarding at all, but it does kind of do away with this gathering part. I think there's somewhere in the middle where hopefully it's fun to explore, and there'll be stuff like in the world rather than just this static world all the time. But I think right now the cool part of the game is the crafting part and giving these items to the NPCs. But I can also see some cool parts emerge where, especially when you start crafting your own like equipment or your own weapons, and you are like just playing with let me refresh this and make like a sword and see what attributes we get. But I think there's some fun somewhere in like, ooh, I want to try a build where my sword shoots fireballs. Like, can I craft that? Can I then go out into nature and like see how well it performs? I fixed this bug last week. Don't mind this at all. But if I take like an axe and say fire, so yeah, I definitely agree. You would need to make the gathering part not feel like a chore, but I hope to make it fun. As I don't want it to feel like I'm just dragging out the puzzle part. I want it to feel like it's enhancing the puzzle part by giving you more opportunities to collect the items that you think would be really cool for the puzzle part, and maybe collect like a big old collection of items. So when you go into the puzzle part, you have a lot of opportunities, a lot of like creative approaches you could take. I think it'll feel most like a chore if you just kind of go collect some items, do a quest, get the next quest, be like, oh, I need to go collect these items. So there's some balance to be done there. But obviously the crafting part is way more fleshed out right now. So where were we? I think we were adding some starting items to the player's inventory. And that's just so we can show them in this UI as we're building it out. Let's go ahead and add some items. I don't know that we don't have any items set up, so we'll just create some real fast. Oh, right. This is... Cool. So that should add it to the first 2 empty slots. So we'll add 1 item. Of 5 bananas and maybe 1 item of a single apple, just so we can test stack sizes. We want to test the value being displayed in the UI. Mostly just want to show that those items are there. But we don't have in the inventory slot anything to actually load that items data into. So we'll need to add that, and that's probably what we'll do here. The question is, do we want that responsibility to live in the inventory slot itself of like loading and unloading data? Or do we want it to be handled up the chain in like the whole window manager of loading the slot's data from here? I think we can do it in the slot itself. So let's go ahead and we'll just create a inventory slot manager, and we'll give that a load item data function. Seems suspiciously like the stuff that we just added for our temporary item slot class. I think all this actually should probably just, well, we want the inventory slot manager to load an inventory slot, not the item itself. So here we'll have we store that. We kind of need, let's just put in, we don't have image generation for the item icons yet. So we're just going to put a text box in here, and we'll put the item name real small just so we can see what's going on. So in this slot, let's create a UI text mesh pro. Expand it, auto size, item name, And let's just give it a little padding for now. We'll replace this with an icon, but at least we can see that items are places. Let's apply this prefab. I don't know why it's not, oh, it is showing up there. Okay. So now in our inventory slot manager, we can just have a temporary text mesh pro UGI. We can say item name.text is equal to item displayed.name. And we will set that reference. Apply the prefab so they all get it. Here we want to make sure that if there's an item, that's when we want to say the name. If there's not an item, we want to set the text to blank string so we don't have that default text in there. And now we should have in our player controller, we grab our inventory, we add 2 items to it. We aren't displaying value anywhere or stack size, so we'll just get the item name for now. When the inventory window is shown, we are loading the inventory. So here's where we want to game object inventory slot. We grab that inventory slot manager. And we load inventory slot data of the inventory's slot at this index. So that should be good. We should now see 2 items in this inventory, hopefully. What resolution is my monitor? It's 4K, but I think I have my resolution down lower right now for streaming specifically. Oh, it's set to 4K. Is everything too small? I can definitely dump it down. Everything seems so big now. But we can work with this. Is this better? Also, thanks for the feedback. Or is this like, is it blurry at this point? I know it's blurry on my monitor because it is supposed to be high resolution, but it's weird. Oh yeah, gotta rescale my OBS. Alright, that should be a little bit better. It's so hard to... I have my OBS on a 1080 screen, so it's a little weird to preview that screen on this screen, but hopefully that's a little bit better. And I can also make things bigger as well. It's readable-ish. Let me... Is the unreadableness due to it being too small or too blurry? Or both? I think streaming in 1080 is probably something to explore. Oh yeah, I didn't even realize I was streaming in 720. I will definitely pump that up to 1080 if I can. Output. I'll probably have to look up what the setting is. And I also wonder how much I can actually change it while streaming, but video has, there we go. There it is. Yeah, when I am not streaming, I will bump this up. It is out scaling to 720p. You're right. Whoopsies. Thanks for pointing that out. I will, in the meantime, just yeah, it's probably really weird with it scaled down and then scaled back up too. Let's see, actually, how many people are in the stream right now? I probably can just, no, I'll do it off after the stream. But thanks for that. I didn't realize I was streaming in 720p. I was kind of, I'm getting closer to the end of the stream. I just want to get this inventory working. So what's happening here is we are loading the inventory in this object start, but the inventory is also in a start function, I assume. Yeah, so here we've got a race condition of our slots aren't created yet because this one's running after the other one. We're going to move this over to awake, and I think that should actually fix it. Didn't fix it, but also no error. Oh, we do have ours. Okay. So loading inventory happens. Oh, this oh. I want to make sure that this happens before we load the inventory. And I guess this needs to happen after we, I don't know if this, yeah, this awake isn't going to be called in a scriptable object. So we probably want to void initialize default slots and call that instead. So we should see inventory has this amount of slots now. Then adding default items to player inventory. put that in awake. And then loading inventory slot data, because the inventory window manager loads that in start. Let's give that a shot. Inventory has 70 slots, adding default items, that's correct. But here, the items don't have an item name, I guess. We're using a default. Let's get rid of, well, we need the default constructor because we need it for deserialization. Let's just use the real constructor in our temporary thing. So it takes cherries and doesn't take anything else, I guess. That's fine. I think it defaults to value 1. And maybe we can actually value, nope. We can test that later. Let's just get this working. So it now should have proper items instead of trying to build them from the default constructor. Potentially. Where are we comparing? I think it's here. I forget the C# thing. I think you actually want is null, so it doesn't use that overridden equality operator. It's a type check. I think we do that in this old project for this reason. Is null? Yeah. Not quite. Oh, well. It would help if our logic was correct. Did we have it equals? Oh, not equals. Okay. Maybe the 5th time is the charm. It was not. So it's erroring. Oh. This is bold because we did not apply it to the prefab. So all the created ones didn't have this reference set. So it was trying to assign to a null reference. Okay, we get all our slots back. We have one error that is probably from setting the item text name. It's a little odd we are getting this though. I'm gonna go ahead and just make sure it's this block that's causing the problem. It might be somewhere else. I just assumed it was here. Okay, we actually still get the error. So it's not there, and they all instantiate correctly. Let me clear and make sure. Pretty sure console's supposed to clear every time you replay, but yeah, we do get that error. Alright, so it's somewhere else. We can leave this commented out for now. Let's just trace through we start by doing add item. We don't override this operator on empty slots. Let's look in the empty slot add item. There it is null. Guess I could trace through the rest, but let's just see if that fixed it. Okay, it did not. But where is our error now? Okay, still the same. I could... Alright. So it happens before loading the inventory, but after adding the default items to the player inventory. So adding default items to the player inventory. Let's just add this in for now. But I'm sure the error is probably in one of these two calls, and they're both the same. But this happens before the awake, and then when we load the inventory, it is in a start call, I think. Here, loading inventory. Let's go ahead and just start bisecting stuff. Figure out which of these two blocks the error is tracing in from. Yay, debugging. Alright, adding default. So it errors before getting to that next debug. Alright, so if we were to comment both of these out, we would get no error. We'd also have no items. Seems fine. We fixed it. Player just can't have items. Who needs items? Cool, no error. Alright, so let's go ahead and break this out. We say item, new item is this. Created cherries. Let's see if it's in the item creation or adding the item to the inventory. Created cherries. It is in adding the item to the inventory. So let's go look at add item. Empty slot is empty. Does that look at item name? No? Okay. Looks at item in the slot. Wait a second. No error. Cool. Where we were finding the next empty slot, we were just searching for slot where slot is empty had item equals null. And since it's an item type, it was using that equality operator. So we want is null to do the type check. Alright, so let's now go uncomment this so we can make sure that our item names are displaying properly and everything else is empty. I don't think I'm gonna do drag and drop and stuff today. It's a lot more to do, but I think if we can just get this basic item system working, then I can do a lot more off stream, and then next week have something a lot more fun to work on. So we'll try and wrap things up a little bit. We now have cherries. I don't think we uncommented the second item. We did not. So let's just make sure that that works. It's all temporary, but let's bring that back in. Clean out some of the debugging. And if we click play, we should have cherries and an apple in our inventory. Cool, we do. So we still need to do image generation on these items. We need to add drag and drop handlers on probably on the slot manager, where when you start dragging, it spawns the hovered item object that has the logic for what happens when you drop it in a slot or in the workbench or on an NPC, etc. We want to add drag and drop to move items around in your inventory. We want tooltips on the items when you hover over them. We still want to add, let's add the stack size to the slot. It's all very kind of placeholdery until we have the images anyway. We don't necessarily need to add like gold or any other details because we'll have those in the hover tooltips. But we can at least, let's add the stack size real fast. If we go look at our inventory slot, just create another stack size object, dump it down here. Maybe on this guy we right and bottom. This guy we align it center and center. And on our slot we want to add a reference to that. We want to probably only show it if the stack size is more than 1. Cool, that works. Did we set that reference? We did not. But now when we go add our items here, they should have a stack size of 5 and 1. So the 5 should show and the 1 should not show any stack size. I think that's normal, that's fine. So we have 5 cherries, we have 1 apple. Cool. So we could start on dragging and dropping. It doesn't hurt. I mean, it might take a while, but going to be doing it anyway. Might as well just do it on stream. But I will take a quick bathroom break. I will be right back. And then we will get more into dragging and dropping items around the inventory. So, be right back. I was saying, let me just double check that I'm not muted. We are back. Thanks for sticking around. We are working on our inventory system for Elixir Emporium, porting it over from our old 2D version into this new 3D world. So a lot of the focus so far has been on this new UI system. I know the last couple weeks we've been seeing a lot of like, oh, we should fix this, we should fix that. We'll go ahead and fix it when we do the new UI. That is now. So we now have items appearing in the player's inventory. There's still a lot to do, but I think what we want to do next is maybe get some drag and drop going. So you can pick up this apple, put it somewhere else in the inventory. That's a good place to start. So we are going to grab our logic of how we did drag and drop in the previous script, but it's going to be slightly different because we're going to put it in the inventory slot, I think, instead of on the item itself. In the previous version, we just had an item display prefab that we stuck in this panel, and we just managed the inventory by what item displays were there. So if you were to drag it into the workbench or somewhere else, it was no longer in the inventory. I think what we want to do is, instead of having item displays, since we now have these slots, if you mouse down on the slot and start a drag, I think we should create a dragged item prefab that handles dragging and dropping, but specifically the logic of dropping it into various spots. So we start dragging here, we get a dragged item, we end dragging on this slot, we now have logic running in our dragged item controller that says here's the slot you're dragging it into, or here's the coordinates so you can find the slot. Likewise, you can drag it up into this alchemy workbench and drop it, and it would put it in those coordinates in the workbench. Still going back and forth a little bit on whether we want to like leave it in your inventory while it's up in the workbench and you're working on it, because it technically is still in your inventory. But I think it would be a little weird to like bring an axe up and fire up and then combine them, and then this item disappears and this item becomes a fire axe. I think it'd probably be better to empty the slot, and then combine them up here and then drag it back down. Or when you close this window, it just gets re-added. Everything up here gets re-added to your inventory. And there's some weird things with that too, of like you could drag everything in your inventory up into here because there's no slots, it's just open space. And then you could like leave this open and go pick up a bunch of items and fill your inventory again, and then you close this. Probably just drops everything. Which sounds fine until you realize you kind of have infinite inventory space that way if you just leave this open while you're out adventuring, collecting as much as you want, dragging more and more stuff up here, and then you run back to town and then close it so everything drops in town. But it's whatever. I think that was all to say, like, we can figure that out as we go. I think we do want that hovered item created though. So let's go ahead and let's take a quick look at how we were doing it. That was on the item display. So what we were doing is this item display is created and added to our inventory container. So your inventory has just a list of item displays that load data into them, kind of the same way a slot does, but also handles pointer in, pointer out for the tooltip, and on pointer down starts a drag, on drag updates the item display to follow you wherever, and then the big beefy boy on in drag, when you let go of the cursor or the mouse, we detect whether it originated in your inventory or the workspace panel, and what panel you moved it into. So all this is fine. It doesn't really scale well as we add more and more stuff to drag and drop from or to. So this is where I want to kind of clean stuff up as we're moving it over. I think it would be really nice to have, for example, item slots, the workbench, the NPC panel, anywhere that you could drop an item to. I think it would be nice to have some sort of interface for receivable item or something where that panel can define its own logic. So great example here of when you open up the shop in the old game, there's a little panel you can drag items into to sell the item. And basically we just, in this logic, when you finish dragging, we go see if your cursor is within that panel's coordinates. And then we have all the logic of what happens if it was. I think what would be way better is if we can still do the where are you dragging it to, but then we can grab the game object of what you're colliding with and look for a can receive item component on it. And if it has one, we can call receive item and pass the item through. So then the shop can have its own logic of selling an item, or the workspace can have its own item of combining items, or the NPC panel can have its own logic of what happens when you give an item to an NPC, or combining items and so on. So I think that's where we want to move towards, just to kind of clean up this logic. It was really nice having it all in one spot, because we know anything relating to drag and drop on the item, all the logic is here. But it has been ballooning bigger and bigger and bigger. And I feel like as we add more UI components and make the UI more complex, we're not going to be able to get away with just checking to see if we're putting it in the coordinate of where that panel is. We kind of need the actual array casting on that panel and colliding with stuff directly, because great example of that is in our NPC window. We have a tab for talking to them, which you can drag an item in to give them that item. We're going to also have a tab for trading with them, which uses their internal inventory. You can buy items from them, you can give items to them to sell it. That's the same coordinates for both of those. So if we're just testing the coordinates of where your cursor is, it's not going to work. We need to also know what panel is open, what is in view, and raycasting is a great way to say all right, we fired a point here, it hit the talk panel body, and then that has an item receivable component, and it can have its logic of what happens when you give the item there. It just gets a little bit harder with making sure that we keep the reference of where the item came from, if it matters. And sometimes it does matter of passing an item into the shop. In WoW, when you drag stuff into slots, your inventory retains ownership but grays out the item until the item is consumed or ownership is otherwise transferred via vendor, trade, or crafting, or whatever. Makes drag slots have less logic and chance for errors. So just to make sure I understand that, if I had this item here and I drag it into, say this is a big slot where I can do stuff with it, it would stay here but grayed out. I think that's what you mean, yeah. And then if I were to drag in a second item up here, they'd both be grayed out. Would it be weird if I had these two items up here now and I drag one on top of the other? The outcome of that is this item gets destroyed and this item gets changed. So in your inventory, you now have empty slot and a different item. Is that weird? Like, is that unexpected at least? Or is that just how it should work? Because it probably is worth deciding which route I want to go before actually implementing all this, because I have seen a few bugs where already, yeah, your items are all stackable, so it's a little weird. Yeah, because even then, I'm probably only dragging out one item from the stack each time I go up, which, yeah, it does make it a little weird to gray the stack out too. Versus, like, if I drag it into your hotbar, it brings the whole stack over too, which is funky. Yeah, I feel like if the items weren't stackable at all, a lot of the inventory system, like as a whole, would be way more simplified and easier, both to code and also understand. But I also think, I mean, almost every time I've shown the previous game, people are always saying like, oh, can I stack these items? Like, I think it's a lot better experience if you can stack all your apples or all your whatever. There's a lot of items that don't stack, like when they have stats and stuff, they aren't going to stack, but again, I guess that is something I need to implement too, because we're just stacking on item name comparisons instead of also the stats. So if you were to have like 10 apples and then one apple that has poison on it, it wouldn't stack, but it'd look the same. Lots of weird stuff. Stacking for reagents is definitely the way to go. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, let's try and get some drag and drop working. So we are just gonna steal all these interfaces that we implemented for dragging and dropping and tooltips, because they're gonna be the same over yonder. Let's take our inventory slot manager, which is where we want to, I think that's where we want to originate the drag from. Alternatively, we originate it from the inventory window manager, and then we need to determine what slot the mouse is starting the drag over and go get the data out of the inventory slot manager of that slot. So it feels like we should just do it here. So if we add all these interfaces, generate them, we don't really need the pointer enter, pointer exit quite yet. That'll be for tooltips. But you want on pointer down. What we can end up doing is create a floating item to drag around, and we can keep updating the position of it, and then on the end drag we will look for a drop target with the receives item component, and also destroy. And I guess, yeah, call the... So that's kind of our plan. We don't have, again, image generation, so let's go ahead and just create a little... let's stick it like here, little image. We'll call it floating item. It'll have an image eventually, but let's say little red guy. And we'll give it a text for the name. And I don't think it needs its own like controller script. We can just update it directly from the slot manager. Let's go ahead and create a prefab for that so we can instantiate it. Say floating item. I guess that's fine name. So we want a those guys. We can create that. We aren't going to do that script quite yet, but we can say floating item dot transform dot find name and just set the name on it. We only want to do this if the item displayed is not null, but we'll add that in a second. I don't want to add too many checks around and then be like, why doesn't it work? Let's add those error checkings when it does. And then here we can go ahead and say, I guess we can store the item being dragged on the slot manager, because you're never going to be able to drag from two slots at the same time unless you have like multiple cursors somehow. So let's say add a reference to the item being dragged. So we can now drag it around, and then we'll skip all that and just say end drag for now. But this should, when we start dragging from an inventory slot, should create our prefab with the correct item text and let us move it around on the screen and stop dragging. We'll do this a little more complicated. We want to set stuff up, but let's make sure that this works as expected. Apply all his prefabs, delete that guy. We roll. And I still need to block raycasting to the world when you click on the panels. But for now, oh right, we didn't set that prefab. It's good for now. So on the slot, we need a floating icon. Let's make that reference private. And should just work. It's not going to work. We didn't apply the prefab changes. So on this guy, apply all. We got to set that prefab item on all of them. All right, moment of truth. Apple? Apple. Wow. We do need to destroy that, I suppose. Cherries. Cool. It drags that as well. And I guess it just says new text if there's no item, but it's a start. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and destroy the floating icon, or item. We want to, on inventory slots, create our first can receive item script. That's not gonna work. Because if we do it this way, the can receive item script has it has its own code. Its code isn't going to change if we put the script on an inventory slot or an NPC panel. So I think maybe the best thing to do is have a can receive item script that we can detect in the end of drag, but give it some sort of identifier where we can put the logic in wherever we want, but we can at least differentiate between which object has this script. So we will say, this is probably not how we want to do it, but say receiver identifier. And then what we could do, I'm just going to write this out and see if it works or if I like it. We're going to raycast here, see if we get a can receive object or can receive item script on whatever we're dragging onto. If we do, then we can, do we want to do something like this, which is kind of the same format of what we were doing here, where we basically have different logic saying, are we moving it here, or are we moving it here, or are we moving it wherever? I guess logically it makes sense that the code needs to live somewhere. Like to make what I wanted to do work, what we would need to do is basically have subclasses of the can receive item and have them called like inventory slot can receive item or shop slot can receive item, etc. And then those would have the logic that runs when they receive an item. And then if they all inherit from can receive item, we can still get them this way, I think. Let's double check that. But I think we can do, That's not at all what we want. Let's just double check and see if this is even a rabbit hill to go down. Get component for child component. For subclass component. I guess we can also see what people suggest this person does. Skill box modal, yeah, that's kind of the same route where you want to take. That is the approach that we took, which is, quote, inelegant as hell. Don't really want to go down the generic route. We fought that for a day last time. Oh. Get component with a base class should find subclasses. I mean, it doesn't say that it gets the child classes, but I feel like it should, so I guess it's fine. But is that what we want to do and just have scripts of just this? If we look at this specifically, does it need any sort of reference back? I guess we do have the reference here we can pass through as a parameter. Part of me thinks it's overkill to set up all these sort of like drag targets, but since the game is literally about crafting and moving items around, it might make sense. I just don't want to have my code splintered around everywhere so fast. It's been... yeah. I think we'll do it. I think we will go ahead and create those subclasses. And then we can have can receive item, public abstract class. Don't need the identifier, but we can say public abstract void or bool receive item. Maybe an item and quantity. It'll return whether it actually received it successfully or not. And we can have those subclasses implement that. And as long as we don't get any weirdities of calling get component on an abstract class, we should be fine. Call the receive item. Yeah, that's what we've done. Okay. And we probably also want to like bool received item is that, and then if we did receive the item, then we can remove it from this slot. And we can deal with stack sizes later, because again, another edge case of like it can only receive one item, but we drag a stack of 5 over. Received item, or the return value should probably be like the quantity of items received. Let's just do that now. We can make this an int, and we'll say return value that were received. So we say int num received items. Let's rename that to receive items. We say if the num received items is equal to our stack size, then we clear the slot, which just do a helper function for. Otherwise, there are items left over that weren't received, but we want to reduce our stack size by the number of items that went over and update our stack size text. So that should probably, let's just also let's do that so we can just call that nicely and not have to reuse that code over and over. Okay, so now to make sure this works, the inventory slot manager can inherit from can receive item, right? Or do I need to make this an interface? Can't have multiple base classes. I mean, yeah. Let's make this an interface. And I don't